Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Ann with a special presentation here on 10 TV Plus. Today, we are talking about the Brian Shaffer missing persons case. This is a case that has haunted Central Ohio for 20 years. Brian Shaffer was a medical student at The Ohio State University, went out with some friends one night, and then disappeared. Today, we will be joined by 4 guests who can offer some unique perspective about this case. We'll have a former morning executive producer, Gretchen Walsh, joining us here, talking about the days back in the early 2000s when this case first broke. We're also talking with Kelly Kokenauer. She's the founder of the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive Facebook group, one of the many social media aspects that have really helped keep this story alive for 2 decades. Then, Columbus Police Detective, retired detective, I should say, John Hurst will also be joining us. He was one of the initial investigators on this case, and he's going to be debunking some myths and theories that have been circulating now for 20 years. And finally, Carla Rogner, a current 10 TV reporter who grew up in Central Ohio, and she'll offer her perspective of how she grew up hearing about this case, and then also going to the Ugly Tuna Saloon back in the day, and then reporting on it today. So we're so glad to be joined today by Gretchen Walsh. She is the former executive morning producer. Great to have you back in the walls of 10 TV.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about this, because this is a case that not only captivated us when we were working together in the 2000s, but really it's continued on. Even after you left, we'd talk about this, like whatever happened to Brian Shaffer?
I mean, we're on a text chain about it, for sure. We are definitely enamored with this investigation. I think, whether you're on the media side of it or the investigative side of it, there's a reason why this story has lasted the test of time, 20 years. And I think especially it's important to point out that in a 24/7 news cycle, when stories like this last that long, it's because of the components that go with it, and the fact that Brian's still missing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to uncover with this.
And back then we were young, right? But we also realized that this is a story that, you know, you say it could happen to anyone, but then the question mark is, how could it happen to anyone with the surveillance that's out there, the cameras that are out there? How does someone just simply vanish into thin air?
Yeah. How do you walk into a place and you're not seen walking out? And there's so much on camera to look at, but then also, what are we missing? I think that a lot of the story is, what doesn't the surveillance video show? What are we missing out of the pictures from that night that might turn over a new leaf, a new part of the investigation?
Well, let's take some of our viewers back to really what happened that night on April 1st of 2006. So we do have some of that surveillance that you're talking about. Right. It was, I think, late at night, around like 1:15, where the surveillance actually shows Brian going up the escalators. There he is.
And he's had a great night. They started down on South High Street, right at the Ugly Tuna Saloon. That's the first bar they hit that night. They were going to make their way down to the Arena District. They were essentially bar hopping down through there. It's the first night of spring break at Ohio State. They're cutting loose. I graduated from Ohio State, a few blocks away from the Ugly Tuna Saloon where we were. It's definitely a very busy area. This was a relatively new area back then as well. I think Campus Gateway had just moved in or taken over quite a bit of that area. So this was a relatively new bar, exciting place for these kids to check out. And I think they're headed up that escalator, which you saw, which I think is very important here. It's a detail that's going to matter. This escalator is going to become a big focus of people coming and going. Essentially, we thought there was one way in, one way out. That is not the case. There are definitely other exits that we can break down. But it's interesting that you see Brian in different parts, different camera shots, but we never see him leave. And every single person that was in that bar is accounted for, according to detectives, other than Brian Shaffer.
Right. And he's actually seen going up and down a couple of times, right? So he went back down at around 1:55. Other surveillance cameras showed Brian outside talking to some more people who have been questioned. And then he re-enters the bar around 2 a.m. But that is the absolute last time anyone has seen him, which has then led to so many questions. There was construction going on around the Ugly Tuna Saloon. Did something happen? Did he fall down an elevator shaft or something that was being built? All of that was checked out. And so the big question is then, what did happen? How did he exit that bar in whatever form?
And the people that he arrived with, he is not obviously seen leaving with. They are seen leaving the bar. There's also a lot of other interesting things with that surveillance. There's 2 Columbus police officers that are standing right in the vicinity of where Brian is talking to these 2 girls that are at the bar, Brighton and Amber. were the names of these two girls that he had met that night through friends of Clint, I believe, and that's who he had showed up with was Clint and Meredith. That's who he went out with that night initially. He's outside talking to these girls, and you're right, when they go back into the bar, that's the last time we ever see him. Now the girls leave, Clint and Meredith leave. Brian, it's a mystery still to this day as to how did Brian leave, if he did.
Right.
That's definitely
the biggest question.
That's the biggest question.
And I think the reason, Gretchen, that this story also has so many emotional elements to it is that as we investigated and reported on the story of who is Brian Shaffer, we learned that he lost his mother 3 weeks before he disappeared to cancer. And then in the days that followed his disappearance, his father, Randy Shaffer, was so relentless in making sure that there were search parties and vigils. And, Brian's apartment was broken into a month afterwards. That led to so many more questions, like why would someone break into that? And police realized there were other break-ins near his off-campus apartment that were all unrelated to this case. But still, every time there was something else that just tugged at, I think, everyone's emotional heartstrings about this young man, 27 years old, who had this bright future ahead of him, about to go on vacation with his girlfriend that he was going to propose to on vacation, and to suddenly just disappear just didn't make sense.
Yeah, he definitely had some real stressors in his life. Medical school, I think, can be extremely stressful. Obviously, the death of a parent, really stressful, and then dealing with the death of a parent and maybe having some friction with your brother and your dad through that process, which would be hard for any family through that grieving process, I think. But anchored in that, I feel like Brian had a bright future. He had a girlfriend. He was very loved by his friends. He had a lot to live for, exciting things that were ahead for him. So for somebody to vanish just like that, that is a huge question and source of confusion, I think, for so many, because I think that there are a lot of different ways that investigation could have gone, but ultimately we're still scratching our heads.
And it touches so many people because other families of the missing, are in the same boat. That you realize this could happen really to anyone, and for reasons that you don't know. And when you don't have those answers, that's the frustrating part of it. We saw some surveillance of Brian going up and down the elevators. We also saw surveillance of, people that they thought were maybe persons of interest. The orange sweater guy.
Right, yes.
Do you remember that story?
When Clint and Meredith are walking out, you see the guy with the orange sweater, he's directly behind them.
Yes.
I felt like he was uncomfortably close to them, but I don't think there was much to that, which we can ask about later. But I don't know how much. But there were a lot of little nuances with this surveillance video. Like I said, with the police officers that were sitting there, that's they're obviously not going to let people leave out of different exits, and I feel like there are a lot of things to study in that surveillance video. Of clues that we can look into.
Well, and I know if anyone studied them, it was you, Gretchen, because we jokingly back then called you like our crime junkie, but now today, fast forward, I mean, that is, the trend was growing. You were ahead of the game, and you really followed this, and so did so many other people that started coming up with their own theories, which I think is what helped keep this story alive.
Yeah, and I don't think we can emphasize enough how different the news landscape was back then. I mean, Facebook was just starting to explode. I'm pretty sure I had a BlackBerry, so texting is relatively new. It was just, people were absorbing news differently, and now I feel like we have become, as a true crime person, even myself that loves it, we have a tendency maybe to insert ourselves into stories and feel like we're a part of the investigation more so than maybe what we are or should be, or we think we are, and we can play that role.
Well, I think police to some extent also count on that, right? They count on us, and they count on all
tips. Yes.
They count on those tips, because we have learned that no tip is too small.
Absolutely.
And in fact, because this story gained such national attention, people were sending in photos to us. They were sending in photos to many of those Facebook groups related to Brian Shaffer and the missing, saying, hey, I think I saw him here, I think I saw him there. And there was that one photo of I would say a disheveled looking man in Mexico that everyone said, this is Brian. And we thought it might be at first.
Big debate, yeah. I mean, it did resemble him, and people had very strong opinions. Still to this day, I think people still have really strong opinions about the different sightings, a dot on a retina of his eye or the iris of his eye. But he had some things that make him easy easier to identify, I feel like. But
the Pearl Jam tattoo that was on his arm.
The Pearl Jam tattoo is a big one.
But as you look at these photos right now, this is the photo that everyone said, homeless American man in Tijuana, right? This was based on a tip, someone who knew about the Brian Shaffer case.
That does look, I mean, that does resemble him for sure.
Well, so we actually brought that photo to Columbus Police, and we said to them, listen, there are too many people talking about this photo to ignore. So what are you doing with this? And I believe we actually have that story from 2020. So we're going to play it for you because this is when 10 TV had unfettered access to the entire case. Take a watch. When it comes to missing persons in Ohio, there is one name that probably resonates more than any other: Brian Shaffer. His case has the makings of a Hollywood movie. A young medical student last seen going up this escalator to a popular campus area bar. But video never showed him leaving. Or did he? Nearly 14 years after Brian disappeared, this photo recently started circulating of a man, supposedly homeless and American, in Tijuana, Mexico. It said, "Help locate." Facebook groups dedicated to finding Brian swore it was him. The theories grew rampant. Brian was alive. So we brought the photo to the attention of Columbus Police and Detective Blanche Tucker. When you first saw this, what did you think?
I was like, wow, it could be. Could it be? It's a possibility.
Because it does look a little
Like him, it does.
It was the first big break for the Brian Shaffer case. Crime Tracker 10 got unprecedented access to the files, showing the endless interviews and the leads police exhausted year after year.
We still get calls and we still receive tips.
Despite those tips and the neighborhood searches, plus pleas for information, answers never came until this photo.
It appeared that it could be Brian Shaffer, but to see if it was him, I contact, the FBI, who assists us in a lot of our cases, to see if they can do a facial recognition.
So the FBI compared the Tijuana man photo with the others they already had in a file of Brian. It took 4 weeks, but finally, Detective Tucker had her answer.
That it wasn't him.
It was not him.
Correct.
Was that a letdown?
It was. My hopes were high that it could be him.
Foul play has never been ruled out, nor has the fact that Brian maybe just took off. The stresses of life, med school, and losing a mother to cancer. Do you feel that somebody that has been interviewed in the past maybe withheld information?
I do.
You do? But you can't say who yet.
Can't say who.
Under CPD's new cold case initiative, Detective Tucker is now reviewing every binder once again. And while this photo is now a dead end, it is, at least for her, progress in a case that continues to haunt.
It would mean closure. Not just closure for us, but closure for the family and the friends.
For Crime Tracker 10, Angela Ann, 10 TV News. So again, that was my story from back in 2020. And, we built up the suspense of, is that photo Brian Shaffer? And finally, the answer was the FBI said no.
Oh, and I know, it's just so crazy because it does look so much like
I feel like
him.
it was a letdown to you too.
Totally, totally let down again. Like I'm let down all over again.
Well, let's talk to somebody who maybe was also feeling the same. Joining us right now is Kelly Bruce Kokenauer. She is the founder of the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive Facebook page. Kelly, it's so good to see you. You're on with me and Gretchen as well. Hello.
It's good to see you guys too.
Let's talk about this, Kelly, because we're talking about. Let's get it off the plate. The FBI said that was not Brian Shaffer. They did their own facial analysis, had their experts say, not him. You, however, took it to your own facial analyst.
This makes you so awesome in my book, too.
What did they tell you?
They told me that the nose cast the same shadow as Brian's, that the ears hit in the same location. He was not able to say it's not Brian without seeing the person in person.
Interesting. So where does that leave you then?
I still have a lot of questions. Of course, I believe that the FBI did look at the photo and everything, but when I have conflicting people telling me things, it causes a lot of confusion, and I would really like to look into that photo a little more.
Kelly, Gretchen and I have always wondered, so take us back. You didn't know the Shaffer family, but you got involved, created this Facebook page. Tell us what your interest was and why.
So I had followed Brian's case since the very beginning, but basically there was no more information on the internet. So I reached out to Lori Davis and we began talking about the case, and we planned the Brian Shaffer March for the Missing. And then she introduced me to Nicholas West, who was creating the Comeback podcast, and he asked me to be his co-host, and I did. But scheduling just wasn't able to be worked out between the two of us with our occupations. So I went on to create Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive.
And we can see from your Facebook page, you have so many followers.
Yeah, that would be me. Definitely one of the several thousand that you have.
But looking at it, obviously this week marking the 20 years since he disappeared, there's a lot of traffic, a lot of people talking about it, even to this day. What do you think is a draw for so many people about this story?
I think it's always been, like I like to call it, the Houdini act. He walked into a bar and is never seen again. And I think it created so much intrigue that people just really wanted answers as to what happened to Brian.
Absolutely. And like when you look at the investigation and the surveillance video, what are your thoughts about what's not on that video? I feel like you have actually done a deeper dive even than I have on that surveillance video, and there's just so many questions with it, what it doesn't show, and what are your insights into that?
I think the most important thing that it doesn't show is it doesn't show Brian, but there were a lot of other cameras in the building at that time, but I have not been able to see that surveillance footage to go through it. I have only received one angle of the camera, and that's the escalator footage that we all see.
That footage is, I mean, I can still see myself in the newsroom in 2006, and Angela comes back with that footage, and we aired that footage just because it was just so fascinating that you see him come in but not come out. I feel like at the time we didn't really know all the exits and the layouts of that building, which has since changed. Even now, the Ugly Tuna Saloon is no longer there, but there were quite a few other exits from that building, right? Like it wasn't just the escalator. Obviously there's emergency exits, things like that. Did they tell you, did they break down any of that for you?
Detective Hurst had broke down some stuff for me and explained the entrances and exits. And it seems that while there was only the escalator exit that was mainly used, there was still employee exits and construction exits. And there were multiple ways to get out of that building.
And there is a lot based on theory and then a lot based on what we see evidence-wise. Based on what you've gathered, Kelly, I feel like you've almost become your own subject matter expert on the Brian Shaffer case, and you've actually had other police departments kind of reach out to you. Do you feel like you are now technically an investigator part of this?
Because we consider you one.
I consider myself just a little nosy, and I was a former skip tracer, so I use those investigative skills to put towards doing something good and trying to help find a missing person. And I've actually worked on several other missing persons cases as well.
And some private investigators out there, they have come up with their theories. And I'm going to ask you point blank. Some say he left the bar, got in a car, got into foul play. Do you believe that?
That's actually my lead theory as well.
Really? Why is that?
Oh, okay.
Because I feel with so many cameras that he would have been picked up if he was just walking down the street. And I feel to miss that many cameras in the downtown area that he had to have been in a vehicle.
But how did he get out of the bar if we never saw him leave?
That I don't know, because there's a lot of other angles of cameras that I haven't seen. So I can't necessarily say that he wasn't seen leaving. I can only say he wasn't seen leaving on the footage that I have.
Yeah, there's also we've seen they said there's a back exit where the band was going out through. There's also a construction area with its own door, which I don't think you could really access, but maybe he could have wandered into that area. But I was very impressed with even listening to your podcast and then following all of our investigative work back then, that how much that they had brought in cadaver dogs. I mean, they really did due diligence looking around not just the Ugly Tuna Saloon, but around that vicinity of that area. And I feel confident that Brian, is not there, at least like looking at all of those angles. What do you feel like?
I feel the same. I actually think the Gateway complex was the most searched location. And not only did Columbus Police Department bring their dogs in and do their searches, but Randy Shaffer also brought dogs in as well.
He did. He did. And even to today, we know that Columbus Police, while they're not officially commenting on this case today with, quote, anything new, we have heard from retired Detective John Hurst before today, and we're going to talk with him in just a minute. But he says that there are still persons of interest,
which we're fascinated by. And also, like, one of the things I noticed too, Kelly, I think that we should ask is, you've gotten some new tips even just this week. Can you tell us more about those?
Well, the main tip that I got that I turned over to Columbus Police Department was a name was given to me, and they said that, excuse me, this person could potentially be responsible for Brian's disappearance. And I had heard this name before. So I went to Columbus Police Department, a detective that I talked to, and I told him about the tip I received, and he was very shocked that I knew the name. And then once I started talking to him, I found out that he has been on Columbus Police Department's radar pretty much since 2006, and there has been multiple searches done, including some as recent as 2020.
So that's very interesting. This name, which I know you are not divulging, but this name, unless you want to, but so
No.
you're basically, no, I didn't think so. And I don't think Columbus Police would want you to either. But this name, you're saying basically CPD did confirm to you has been on their radar since 2006. Did they tell you why? Is it a friend? Is it an acquaintance? Someone in a class with Brian?
A relative.
Relative.
I was actually told that Meredith brought up the name during her interviews.
So
I don't have any more information than that, but I was told that she brought it up during her interview.
That Meredith brought up.
Okay, and I found that interesting because I feel like I read something that it was corroborated with a second tip to CPD from an entirely different source, but the same name, which I find, you've got two people, two different names that are not related, that don't know each other. That seems like an interesting tip for this time period.
It absolutely does, because when I said my tipster's name to the detective, he had no clue who I was talking about at first. So I immediately realized we were talking about two different people that gave this man's name.
Interesting. You say your theory, working theory as of today, is that Brian somehow got out, got into a car, and there was foul play. That leads me to my next question. Do you think he is still alive? Or do you think that perhaps he got into a car or just wanted to disappear? Or do you really think that there was foul play involved? And that's why we have not heard from him in 20 years.
I do think there was foul play involved, but at the same time, there's not any evidence that we have. So I could say the same thing, that it's still a possibility that he did walk away from his life and he still is out there somewhere.
So what I find interesting about, like, when we look at, there's just not a lot of motive to foul play with Brian. I feel like we've heard little theories here and there, and I'm not a rumor monger with spreading this, but it's like we know that there were the drug possibilities of that. But I feel like they would have found something at his apartment. There would have been some kind of evidence pointing to that, and I have never heard police actually go along
with any kind of
motive at all. And
have you, Kelly?
Have you heard of any motives?
I have not either.
Which is why this is really so perplexing, don't you think? I mean, again, a man with a bright young future in front of him, and to suddenly disappear, I mean, the big question is why and how?
And I found one of the interesting things about when we talk about motive, I mean, there's actually probably 20,000 motives with that life insurance money. But one of the things I found really interesting, even from your perspective, was that you couldn't rule him. You said it, you could not rule him out. And that police couldn't rule him out. Like Randy Shaffer, I'm sorry, I should clarify that. Yeah. Randy Shaffer could not be ruled out, as a suspect.
I couldn't rule him out based on the information I had. I'm not sure about Columbus Police Department, but I believe the private investigator, Don Corbett, wasn't able to rule him out either.
Kelly, any final thoughts, final words as we talk about the fact that this has gone on for 20 years, and I'm sure that it will continue to go on not only for you, but everyone else until there is closure. What final words do you have for people who are watching right now?
I hope everyone just keeps sharing Brian's story and sharing his photo and keeping his name out there, because even though it's been 20 years, we are seeing that tips can still come in. So even if it's a small amount of information that you have that you don't feel is relevant, it very much could be. So if you know anything, contact the Columbus Police Department, because the Shaffer family needs answers as to what happened to Brian.
They do.
Yeah, we're just so appreciative of your work and what you've done with this. And you have really taken the ball with us. Angela, really, I can't just emphasize this enough, how much she ran with this. Like when the very first days of this investigation, Crime Tracker 10, was like, this was the girl, the source. She really formed a lot of relationship with us. And I love seeing you pick up that ball too and go with it, because this is definitely one for our history books and that we're going to keep wondering about.
Kelly, thank you so much. Good to see you. And we'll, of course, see you on the Facebook page as well. We'll keep in touch. All right. That was Kelly Bruce Kokenauer. She, again, as she said, was the founder of the Brian Shaffer Dead or Alive Facebook page, which she started soon after and has really followed for 20 years. She did mention, obviously this is closure that the family really needs, mm-hmm. and that's really the bottom line of all this, to contact Columbus Police. We did contact Columbus Police. They also offered us a statement as well, because we wanted to know, where does the case stand as of today? For many people who don't know, a lot of times the detectives who are on a case, they retire, it goes to somebody else, and then it gets us reassigned. And there's a lot of, I guess you could say, catch up.
Fresh eyes.
Fresh eyes, right? Which was a good thing,
yes,
on one hand. But on the other hand, the challenge is they got to dig through all the files, right? And relook at it. So we asked Columbus Police, really, where does this case stand today for us? They released a statement to us, basically saying that they really can't talk about it. They said that there are no new updates to share at this time, so we won't be able to participate in interviews regarding this case. So anything official mm-hmm. that we can to kind of cross the T's and dot the I's here, not coming from CPD.
Yeah, and even though there's no evidence of Brian being deceased, there is still an immense amount of things to go through, evidence to go through, investigative points to go through. So I can't imagine the case file, the lift of any of these, the new regime that comes in to investigate this. Like, that's got to be a big lift for them as well.
And speaking of Columbus Police, I am right now getting a text message from retired Detective John Hurst, who says he's ready to go. So, Detective Hurst, hopefully you can hear us. But, he was one of the initial investigators in this case, talking about, and he was there when they had the search parties. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, would run those search parties, so on and so forth. He actually was out there with the family, helping them put up the flyers. And I think at the same time also trying to see who showed up. Right? That's a part of the investigative angle of seeing, like, okay, who's there?
Right.
Did we talk to these people? Who are you? How do you know Brian?
Right. Just like with the surveillance video, sometimes what's not there can speak volumes too.
Yeah. And over the years, John Hurst has been in touch, he's telling me, with CPD, right? Like, this is a case that he has followed for more than a decade. So it's not something that they can just let go when they retire.
Yeah, you can tell this is one that's in his, just listening to his interviews, this is one that's in his crawl. This is one that's going to eat at him. This is one that's important.
Yeah. So now we're joined by retired Columbus Police Detective John Hurst, who is with us, coming to us to talk about this. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk about this case, which I know has really haunted you for 20 years.
Yeah, it's one of those cases that I think any law enforcement officer or detective gets, that when you retire, you want to make sure everything's solved and closed before you leave. But it seems like a lot of times we just get that one case that it's there, it's always there. Even though you're retired, you think about it, you look at it. You go back, you try to think about, what else could we have done? Is there something we missed? Those kind of things. Even today, I'm still thinking those things.
Well, why has it been so hard, John, do you think, to solve this case?
Well, a lot of the reasons, I think, is when he went out to the Ugly Tuna, we got him coming in. But after he left there, it's just like he vanished. There's no crime scene. We weren't able to locate any video of him coming and going, or not going. We also checked video in the area to see if we had any cameras, in a several block area that might have picked him up. But what we ran into a lot of times was those cameras weren't working. Some buildings had decoy fake cameras on that just to make it look like they had video cameras. And then we had Detective Edwards going through video. He got everybody coming in, he got everybody coming out. He had Brian coming in, but we weren't able to pick up Brian coming out, which leads to the theory that something happened to him inside the building there. But we searched the building. I mean, took off utility doors that were screwed in, those types of things. Had dogs come in, and there was no evidence that anything happened inside the building.
I love what I do recall the dogs being brought in and the search for those as well. And then I recall that his scent was tracked to a Wendy's nearby. And what was the significance of the Wendy's?
Well, the Wendy's did have a camera on the outside, and we went over and we looked into that. Unfortunately, it wasn't working, and had it been working, they told us it was only on the drive-through. So again, that gave us a direction that we went to and started looking down that way in the beginning, and then we expanded the search in all four directions around the Ugly Tuna Saloon, the Gateway complex.
I am curious that you said, obviously, you feel like there might have been foul play that happened within the bar, which leads me to my question then. Did you look at surveillance in the days following April 1st to see that if something did happen to Brian in the bar and whatever happened, maybe somebody hid his body and waited a day or two to bring it out in some form, where there was a trash can? Like, did you look at also those cameras in the days that followed or weeks?
Yeah. We checked actually the day before and a few days afterwards, and didn't come up with anything. And I've never said that I believe foul play happened in the building. I believe at some point he had foul plays, that he couldn't get out of, but I believe that happened outside the building, because we scoured the building. I mean, uh, from head to toe, so to speak, and come up with nothing.
So, John, I know that you are writing a book about this case, and the purpose is to really debunk a lot of the conspiracies and the myths out there, which is why we really wanted to bring you on today, 20 years later, because it's almost like a whole new generation is learning about this case. But for people like me and Gretchen who followed this from the get-go, we still have our own theories. I mean, if you're saying there's no video of Brian leaving, but foul play happened outside the bar, well, then he must have gotten out. Did he disguise himself? Is that a theory that you guys worked?
Well, again, we had Detective Edwards go. He got everybody coming in. He was able to track everybody coming out, except
So the
Brian.
numbers matched. Like 100 people went
No,
in, 100 people came out.
right. And,
Okay.
101 went in and 100 came out.
Hmm.
My belief is that the construction area that was going on underneath the Ugly Tuna, there was a stairwell and an elevator, and that went down into that area. And there was no cameras down in that area. The doors were secured by plywood and a lock and chain. When we checked that out, you could push on the doors and easily, go in and out of the doors there. We had cadaver dogs come in. They searched that area. It was basically a dirt floor at the time. The cameras that were outside those corners were pan cameras. They would pan one direction and then the other. Um, I believe somehow he managed to get out when the cameras weren't facing the door, and went out of the building.
I know that technology has just changed so much. It's hard to even describe how different things were in 2006 versus today, 20 years later. Was there a digital footprint that Brian left? Were there clues amongst the digital technology, breadcrumbs per se, that led you guys to anything or gave you any theories?
Well, unfortunately, Randy canceled Brian's debit card, and Brian rarely used cash. He always uses debit cards. So once that was canceled, and we found that out, any digital footprint that may have been created, uh, we weren't able to do that with the credit card. As far as cell phone technology back then, it's not like it is today. We did try to use what technology we had back then, and I don't know if maybe today's technology they could take the information that we were provided from the cell phone company and maybe come up with something.
You talked about Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, who really spearheaded so many of those searches and really kept Brian's story in the news, so to speak, by organizing search parties and vigils. But I am curious because we just spoke with Kelly Bruce Kokenauer with the Facebook group Dead or Alive, Brian Shaffer, and she had talked about not being able to rule out certain people, and I think Randy was one of them. And you say that there are persons of interest still today in this case. I mean, were you able to rule out family members, friends that he was with, Clinton, Meredith? What can you debunk with those theories?
Well, that's one thing that is frustrating when you're an investigator. You have individuals out there who come up with theories that are just not true. And Randy was investigated, Derek was investigated, polygraphed, and passed. And, those are normal things. We're always going to look at the family members first in a case like this. So they were both looked at and ruled out as suspects.
Something I wrote down that I actually love this. It said, sometimes the louder the cases get, the murkier it often becomes. And I wonder if that's true from your investigative standpoint. Like, has the technology added a layer of complication to this with all these theories online, debunking things? What's that like from the investigative standpoint?
Well, in the beginning, I'd go in and look at these theories that were being posted online, and some of them were just so far fetched. It got to the point I'm like, I just can't look at these anymore. But the main thing I was looking at back in the early days was to see, a lot of times somebody may insert themselves back in, and with technology, they may be doing it, through a web-based site, or leaving comments somewhere on a podcast. So I was looking at all that stuff, and it's just, like it does get murkier because as time goes on, somebody will hear a rumor and they'll add to it, and then before you know it, it's totally different than it's like in school when the teacher would whisper in your ear, California, and by the time it got to the last student in the class, it might have been Ohio, and that's what we see a lot, I think, with these online situations.
John, the last time we really feel like there was a big quote unquote break in this case was the fact that the FBI analyzed these photos. And I know you saw the photos because I think I brought it to you as well. I said, hey, this photo of the Tijuana man in Mexico, everyone's saying it's got to be Brian. It's got to be Brian. So at the time we brought it to CPD, the detective on the case at the time said they did send it to FBI. Facial analysis came to the conclusion that it was not Brian. Do you believe in that as well? And then since 5 years ago, what conversations have you had with current CPD detectives on what is new with the case?
Yeah, the FBI did do the photo analysis and came up that it wasn't Brian. And that's one of the technologies that, we didn't have back then that was available that we could use for that type of situation. but I think that was a good way to clear out that theory or possibility that it was him, because there was a theory that somebody said he took off to Mexico. So that kind of ruled that person out anyway, as far as if it was Brian. Um, as far as talking to CPD detectives, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Since I'm retired, I'm not allowed to access information that I had access to when I was active duty, and that's kind of frustrating because I have spoken to a couple detectives, not necessarily about details of the case, but they reached out to me and said, you guys really conducted a really huge investigation, and looks like you left nothing unturned, which, that kind of makes you feel good, but it still doesn't solve, what happened.
And when you talk about foul play, and Gretchen was talking about this, the one thing that you guys never did release was, like, if there was foul play, what was the motive?
Yeah, I could never think through the motive. And like I was telling Kelly earlier, one of the motives I had heard was, there might have been drug activity in Brian's past, potentially. That was unproven from what I had seen, but, definitely part of that murky rumor mill we were talking about that we had to debunk there. And, was there a motive underneath that? Like, was there something? I just feel like if there was drug activity in Brian's life, there would have been evidence of that in his apartment, in his past, within his bank account. I feel like drug activity is kind of hard to hide.
What do you think, John?
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to hide. We looked into that, and we weren't able to uncover anything that indicated that he was involved in any drug activity, or even using any type of drugs. So we were able to rule that out. And that's just one of those theories that was floating around, that we were able to debunk. A lot of things, when I was working active duty, I had to watch what I say and what we released, and I'm still careful on how I comment, because I don't want to mess up the investigation down the road. But it's been 20 years. One of the theories we had back then, that something did happen to him, that there was some foul play. Um, Really, that wasn't released, because the theory then was, if you say he's deceased, and he shows up one day, then it's not going to look good for the department. Um, but as far as a motive, sometimes um, you don't know the motive until you find the person, and you start working backwards from where they're at. But there was nothing to indicate drug activity. There wasn't anybody that we found that had a reason to be angry with Brian, that kind of thing. So the motive, I think, is still left out there as to what happened to him.
So the possibility, John, you're saying is, if he did leave in some way, met foul play outside the bar, that could have been something, sadly, as simple as perhaps a crime of opportunity that happened to Brian.
Exactly. I mean, we traced the path, several different paths, but we started with the path that he would normally take back to his apartment, and weren't able to come up with anything, to indicate that he had went that way. A lot of people indicated that, wanted to say he was heavily intoxicated. I think he had been drinking, but I don't think he was intoxicated to the point that he, had no clue where he was or where he was going.
Well, you've certainly offered some fresh perspective here, John, in terms of how did he get out of the building? Because that has been the big question mark for 20 years, is if all the surveillance showed, like you said, 101 people going in, hypothetical number, but only 100 leaving. Now we do know that there were other exits where the cameras did not capture. That could be a possibility.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of frustrating back then, because we thought, well, with the cameras, we're going to see something, and unfortunately, there wasn't anything where he popped up on. Um, there was a theory that somebody carried him and threw him into the dumpster. There was a camera in the hallway. There was a couple cameras in the dumpster area, and there was nothing that indicated at that time that he would have been placed in a carton or a bag and disposed of in that manner.
Was there any digital evidence? Was there any digital evidence that would have pointed to Brian planning any kind of to leave on a whim, just walk away from his life and never look back? I mean, I feel like, I don't know if they could track Google, like if you could track things like that back then. Like I said, technology was so different, but I wasn't sure if that information would even be available. Like I feel like my search history would tell a lot about me right now.
Yeah, we did confiscate his computer. Actually had two of them, one for class and one that he did his personal stuff on. And neither one of those showed any type of searches like how to disappear without being found, or those types of things. And we actually were able to copy his hard drives, and the department still has the hard drives, probably in the evidence locker down there at headquarters.
And you spoke a lot, John. I know you were close with Randy Shaffer, Brian's dad, and you also spoke with Brian's brother, Derek. And from best of your knowledge of what they were telling you is that, while there may have been stresses of a med school student and losing his mom, 3 weeks prior, there wasn't anything outside of that might have indicated that he just wanted to walk away from his life.
No, we Randy and I were very close, and he would call me in the middle of the night sometimes, and we would just talk. He was very heartbroken over the situation. Brian, at that point, there was no indication that he was depressed or, then other than the normal, if you lose your mother, you're going to be sad
Sure.
and upset. But Brian and his mother were very close, but there was nothing that indicated that he had all this going on and just said, the heck with it, I'm out of here. Is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. And with today's technology, he could have used, maybe there's a theory he took another identity. Yeah, that's possible. But there was nothing to indicate that he was looking on the internet to figure out how to do any of those things, and it just didn't seem plausible at the time.
No secret bank account or anything like that.
No, and there was quite a few people in the department that believed that was a good possibility. He just took off, but we weren't able to find anything to indicate that that's what he did.
Well, we do want to thank you, John, for your time. Any final words for people out there in terms of just how we're going to solve this case? And by we, I mean you and Gretchen and me and really all of Central Ohio that wants to have this case solved.
Well, I always believe when something like this happens, there's somebody seen something, and a lot of times people will see something and they'll think, well, that's not that big a deal, and they don't call in, they don't report it. But I believe it's going to take that one phone call where somebody calls in and says, hey, I did see this, didn't think anything of it. Maybe it's useful, and that's going to be what breaks the case.
Well, we want to thank you, John, for your time, for your commitment to this case. And I know that after working with you for so many years back in the early 2000s, this is one of those cases that I think in our heart of hearts we want solved, not just because we can close the books on it, but really knowing the families so well as we did over those years, that this is now personal in a way, too.
Definitely.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
It's
Retired
very
detective.
personal.
It is. Thank you so much. Retired Detective John Hurst joining us on this podcast talking about Brian Shaffer now missing for 20 years. Thank you. You know, Gretchen, he talked about the family. And I think I remember over the years when you and I worked together, we would get phone calls from Randy Shaffer morning, noon, and night.
Yes. Randy, he was, it was almost heartbreaking. I remember so many parts of that investigation where he would hire, he actually organized some of his own searches. He really tried to keep Brian's name in there, but the psychics that he would hire, and then he would follow their tips, I mean, to the letter. And it was just sad for us to see this poor dad trying to find his son and really scratching and clawing to keep his name in those headlines any way he possibly could.
And especially after losing his wife to cancer just 3 weeks before this.
I mean, it was definitely I just can't imagine walking in that family's shoes, but I think Randy was overall a good dad. I think him and Brian had their issues just looking at the history of some of their relationship. But again, I just think that a lot of times when families go through things, especially the death of a loved one that close to you, there are a lot of hiccups that could come in that relationship. And I think ultimately they were close as father and son.
And we should mention also Alexis Wagner, that was her name at the time. She was his girlfriend, soon to be his fiance. And in the beginning, we spoke with her so many times about what happened to Brian, and you could feel her pain. She
put everything out there. I mean, she called his phone every day.
She did.
For an extensive amount of time until at one point the phone had rang, and I think it gave her false hope that he was, possibly, still out there. Sure. And I think that she was really committed to finding him and helping investigators any way she could. And I really think Brian's friends that were out with him that night for the Clint Meredith, those, from what I've read, I think that everybody has really tried to cooperate. I know there's a lot of speculation Clint got an attorney and won't take a polygraph, but from what I've heard, and I'm the daughter of a former prosecutor and a common pleas judge, and he would probably tell us not to do that as well.
And
always get a lawyer.
You talk about the phone. Back in the day, they could triangulate things and pinpoint it to places in Hilliard. And I remember Alexis telling us that when the phone rang and rang and rang, that's an indication that the phone still works. And then one day it just stopped ringing. Like it would go straight to voicemail. So you knew the battery died. And that was really heartbreaking. Something that Alexis also shared with us back in the early days of the search parties was the voice message that Brian left for her.
You're right.
We actually have that story for you right now that we want to play.
Next message.
For Alexis Wagner, staying connected means playing a message.
Hey Alexis, I just want to say I love you.
And paying a cell phone bill.
Well, I call it every night before I go to bed. If I listen to it, it's, him saying, I'll call you back.
And the thought that her boyfriend will one day call her back is what keeps Wagner going. Her boyfriend, 27-year-old Ohio State University medical student Brian Shaffer, disappeared 6 months ago today. It's an anniversary Wagner never wanted the two of them to share.
It's a lot of time to think that we don't know anything, because we really don't know anything more than what we did, 6 months ago.
Yet Wagner holds on to hope and messages.
You're really beautiful.
And a belief there will be a different outcome.
Hoping that in the next 6 months we find something out, and that maybe something good will happen in the next 6 months, and it'll be better than the last 6 months have been.
I mean, it's just a little haunting to hear her talk to us 6 months after Brian disappeared, and with hope in her voice that she said, hopefully we'll hear something new 6 months from now. So what is interesting, and we're bringing in now 10 TV's Carla Rogner, who's joining us, because Carla, you are a current reporter here at WBNS.
Yes.
So I'm so excited to kind of merge you two together, two great journalists. But let's talk about this, because you grew up in Central Ohio, and you were saying, as we approach this day, marking 20 years, you remember this growing up.
I mean, this has been a huge topic of conversation in the newsroom this week because this was such a huge case. I mean, this is just one that sticks with you. I don't remember seeing as I mean, I remember seeing his face like everywhere. I don't remember hearing about it for the first time, but it's just one of those things that everybody knows about and everybody wonders what happened to him.
What were you hearing? Like, what were your parents telling you? And then when you went to college, what were they telling you as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the crazy thing is this happened in such a prominent place on High Street. So every time you go down that street, you see where this happened and you're like, that's where Brian Shaffer disappeared from. I actually went there once before it closed and before it turned into Ugly Tuna 2.
Right.
And I remember going up those escalators and thinking, these are the escalators that we've seen a million times in that video of Brian Shaffer, and it just kind of sticks with you. And I actually talked to my mom last night. I was like, do you remember this case? And she's like, yes. I wonder what happened. Everybody wonders.
You've bridged the gap from one generation to another, and now another generation is literally invested in this as much as we are.
Which is what I think Gretchen and I find so fascinating, because we're invested as journalists and people who cover this story. But why do you think it has transcended, jumped from us to your generation of people who are saying this is still top of mind?
Well, I think especially as it continues to be a mystery, and as I've gotten older, you're in college, it's such a normal thing to do. Go out with your friends on High Street when you're in college, and everyone, that's a popular campus bar to go to. Everybody who goes to Ohio State, who's visited friends at Ohio State, has probably been there, and you can just see yourself, in this group of friends going up that escalator, and I mean, he never comes out. It's just, it really sticks with you.
That's a good point. I mean, I think a lot of us can identify with Brian, especially we have such a big, OSU is such a huge part of our existence here in Columbus, and it's such a staple of our community, and that is a good point.
And I remember back in the day, because it was such a big story and the headline was OSU medical student disappears and vanishes, that the university actually sent out a message, like Buckeye nationwide, to let people know. And they rarely do that.
Right.
They rarely send things out to say, please, if you know anything, let us know. Contact police, Central Ohio Crime Stoppers, so on and so forth. And, as we talked this past hour about the Shaffer family and the tugging at the heartstrings, you actually recently heard or got a statement from them. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, we've been digging into this all week and kind of learning about what's new. So I reached out. We tried reaching out to the family, and as you've experienced in the last 20 years, his brother's very private. But I spoke to a family friend, Lori Davis. She's been working with the family since Brian went missing, and she shared a statement that she received on behalf of Derek's wife, Maureen. And it says, every day we think about Brian and can't believe it's been 20 years. We still continue to hope and pray to have answers someday and wish that anyone who knows anything would come forward. And Lori pointed out when she talks to the family, it's hard for them every day, and then these anniversaries come up and everyone's talking about the case again. And she said it's hard for them to have the attention on it again. But again, that attention's important in some ways too, if it can bring about new information and new tips.
Sure. And especially, as we were talking to the retired detective, right, they did exhaust almost everything that they could find and figure out. And so perhaps now, 20 years later, who knows? Somebody knows something.
Somebody has to.
Right? And so perhaps this will generate that again, for the family to have this solved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's hope so. That would just be, that family needs closure, and that would be amazing.
They really do. Carla Rogner, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you sharing that statement from the family as well, because, I think what is lost on people, like you said, for anniversaries, it makes a headline, but it's an everyday, every hour, every moment sadness for these families who are still wondering what happened.
And it can be hard to remember this is a real person, a real family, when you're just seeing the headlines. There's so many conspiracies to throw around too, but this is a nightmare, really, at the end of the day.
And as journalists, we come up with all the conspiracies, right? Because we are also trying to find the answer.
Oh, we go down some rabbit holes, yeah. I mean, we know how to do that. We do it well.
Right. Well, we want to thank you for this special presentation looking at the Brian Shaffer missing persons case 20 years later, as we look for answers and try to bring some of those answers not only to Central Ohio, but also to the Shaffer family. If you do know anything, there is still a reward for information that could help solve this case. So you can contact Central Ohio Crime Stoppers. You see that number right there, 614-460-TIPS. That number again is 614-460-TIPS. I do want to thank Gretchen Walsh, former morning executive producer here at 10 TV.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it has been such a pleasure. And honestly, I feel like as much as I knew about this story. So did you. People always think it's the reporters or anchors that know stuff, but you did some of your digging behind the scenes.
I just worked with what you got back to the newsroom and tried to make it look as presented in a way that I thought that people would be able to absorb the information and then be able to apply that, just from the investigative standpoint for us too.
Well, based on what we heard today, we had a little bit of new information thanks to retired Detective John Hurst, debunking some of those theories.
Love that.
That were out there. But again, until this case is solved, I do believe that this will continue to haunt Central Ohio until we get those answers. Thank you again for joining us here on 10 TV Plus.